Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone who is here today. We have a virtual full house. Everybody who can be here is here. So if you know anyone who was unable to register and join us today, please let them know that they can see our video, which will be on our website and also on our YouTube account, probably sometime tomorrow. I also want to thank each of our presenters today. They have worked very hard to learn as much as they can about all of the propositions. We will review the propositions, and at the end of the presentations, we'll take your questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A box, and please remember to tell us which proposition you're asking about. We will have the person who presented that proposition answer your questions. Sometimes one of the other presenters may know an answer to your question, so we may do that. And the way that we'll handle it is Rachel and I will take turns asking the questions. So you can just wait for us to get to your question. We may bundle questions. If we see several questions that are very similar, we may sort of bundle them too, if we have a lot of questions at the end. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen so we can start with the PowerPoint. So here we are. And I'm going to begin by talking about how to evaluate ballot propositions. One of the things we like to think about is, will it make things better? Better as you define it, of course, and better in California. Whatever you think would make California better, that's one way to think about it. We think a really important thing to think about is who sponsors it and who opposes it. That gives you a lot of information. Along with that, how much money have they spent trying to get it passed? And does the measure mandate a government program without addressing how it would ever be funded? And you know, California has a very large constitution. We're all pretty aware of that. Does it amend the constitution, or would a statute accomplish the same purpose? Proposition 14 will be presented by Katie Garricky.
Thank you. Proposition 14 on stem cell research needs a little background. And in 2001, the federal administration limited funding for embryonic stem cell research. So in response, because they wanted funds for this, California passed a citizen initiative ballot measure. And this provided for funding for $3 billion through the state sale of public bonds to investors, with the principal and the interest paid from the general fund. The purpose was to fund stem cell research for many diseases in California, and it also created the California Institute for Regenerative Money, CIRM. And CIRM was designed to award grants to universities and other entities to support stem cell research. And this research that they began to do led to more than 2,900 medical discoveries and 70 clinical trials, and helped to accelerate cures for chronic diseases. The original funding of $3 billion has mostly been spent, and also matching donations that it received. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. So, Proposition 14 is called Stem Cell Research Institute Bond Initiative Statute, and it's in 2020. So this authorizes California to sell $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds over a number of years to fund grants through CIRM so that universities, state colleges, community colleges, nonprofits, and private groups can ask for awards to do stem cell research. The grants will be funded for this and for serious diseases. There is $1.5 billion set aside for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's nervous disorders. And also Proposition 14 provides medical training and construction of research facilities. Of course, there are arguments for and against, and the arguments for are that medical breakthroughs can save lives and save healthcare costs, and the funding will contribute to the California economy through new revenue. Arguments against are that California faces enormous budget deficits and should invest directly in healthcare and other needs. And the federal limits on spending that started it all are gone now, and the therapies should be the responsibility of the federal government. Next slide, please. So, if Proposition 14 passes, these grants will be funded to support stem cell and other research. Examples are spinal cord injuries, infectious diseases, epilepsy, Alzheimer's, and other diseases. And at the same time, there will be some improvements in the internal structure of CIRM for more efficiency and transparency. The supporters of Proposition 14 are the Californians for Stem Cell Research, Treatment, and Cures, and this is a coalition of 70 leading patient organizations, and they have reported spending over $6.5 million toward this. The opponents are two people who signed the ballot arguments, Vincent Fortanesque, a medical doctor, and Patrick James Baggett, a medical doctor. And no report of spending has come through them. Next slide, please. So, a yes vote means the state will issue $5.5 billion in new bonds to pay for stem cell research. And a no vote means that the state will not issue the $5 billion. And so CIRM will not have funds to offer grants. There are fiscal costs to the state. These are estimated to be $5.5 billion plus in principal, plus the $2.3 billion in interest to bondholders. And this would be over 11 to 25 to 30 years. That could average about $260 million per year from the general fund. There could be more revenue from the state because of inventions that will help to cover the costs of patient treatment. And there could be some returns to Medi-Cal. That's the end of Proposition 14 for now.
Proposition 15 will be presented by Tammy Nickel.
Thank you, Barbara. Proposition 15 increases funding for public schools, community colleges, and local government services by changing the tax assessment of commercial and industrial property. It is an initiated constitutional amendment, which would need a simple majority to pass. Some background information helps to build a context for Proposition 15. By the mid-1960s, California school districts were raising more than half their revenue by taxing local property. The Western Center on Law and Property maintained that the system was inequitable and thus in violation of Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. In 1968, the California Supreme Court agreed with the Serrano plaintiffs in Serrano versus Priest, which touched off a series of legislative and popular initiatives. Then 10 years later, in 1978, California passed the People's Initiative to Limit Property Taxation, which is better known as Prop 13. It was spearheaded by Howard Jarvis, and its stated intent was to prevent older Californians from being taxed out of their homes or forced out of their homes because of increasing property taxes. Prop 13 states that the maximum amount of any ad valorem tax, any tax that is based on the amount of a value of a transaction of property on real property should not exceed 1% of the full cash value of such property, and that the value of those properties would be reassessed only when the property changed hands, changed owners, or when it was completely reconstructed. This tax collected by counties and apportioned according to laws was collected by counties and apportioned according to the law to the districts within counties. Prop 13 rules apply equally to all real estate, and that includes residential and commercial. California went from a system in which each district determined its own revenue to one in which the state decided every district's revenue. So Prop 13 removed control of property from school districts and assigned it to the state. I know it's a lot of background, but it leads up to Prop 15. Since then, California has experienced 40 years of disinvestment in schools and local government services. There have been other measures such as Proposition 98 that have impacted the loss of revenue, but education in California has never really recovered from Prop 13, which shifted funding control from communities to the state. Next slide, please. So enter Prop 15. Prop 15 aims to increase funding for schools and communities. It would change the current Prop 13 tax rules only on commercial and industrial properties worth more than $3 million. It would not change the property tax assessment for residential, agricultural, or even commercial agricultural properties. Prop 15 would establish what's called a split roll tax, which means that commercial properties and residential properties would be assessed differently under the law. Residential and agricultural properties would continue to be assessed upon the change of ownership or complete reconstruction as under Prop 13, but commercial and industrial properties would be reassessed every 3 years. Next slide, please. So if Prop 13 passes, local governments and school districts would get between this slide says 6.6 and 12 billion, but I read earlier that it's between 8 and 12 billion in revenue, which would be dispensed locally through local control funding formula. Supporters include the California Teachers Association, the California Nurses Association, the ACLU, the League of Women Voters of California, the California Nurses Association, the Sierra Club, and the California League of Conservation Voters. Opponents include the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the California Taxpayers Association, the NAACP, the California Chamber of Commerce, and the California Business Roundtable. Next slide, please. So a yes vote means that you're supporting a California constitutional amendment to require commercial and industrial properties to be taxed on their market value with the exception of properties that are zoned for commercial agriculture. Supporters have collected $21 million in support of this as of the 1st of September. A no vote means that there will be no change to the current law. Opponents have collected $5.5 million as of the 1st of September. If Prop 15 passes, it will create between $8 and $12 billion per year in income by 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. I'm going to present Prop 16. Prop 16 is pretty straightforward and it's easy to understand. Its title is to allow diversity as a factor, and it means one factor, not all factors, in public employment, in public education, and public contracting. And it is a legislative constitutional amendment. However, Prop 16 really is about the repeal of Prop 209, which was passed in 1996. Prop 209 outlawed affirmative action programs. Affirmative action programs really began in the mid-1960s to give opportunities to underrepresented population. At the time 209 was passed in 1996, many people felt that the racial goals of that time had been met. In recent years, it seems like people have changed their mind, and many feel that unconscious bias has held underrepresented populations back during all of this time. And Prop 16 would help to correct that. The supporters say that it will help women and people of color while fighting against longstanding patterns of discrimination. And all of us deserve equal opportunities and quality education. Opponents say that everybody should be treated equally, and that when making decisions, we should not favor one ethnic group over another. Prop 16 would allow public institutions to take diversity into account as one criteria among many criteria for hiring in public education, state government employment, and state government contracting. The supporters of Prop 16 are Kaiser Permanente of California, the ACLU, the NAACP, California Teachers Association, the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. The opponents are the American Freedom Alliance, the American Civil Rights Institute. A yes vote means that you support this constitutional amendment that would repeal Prop 209. A no vote means that you oppose this constitutional amendment, thereby keeping Prop 209 in effect. The amount collected for those supporting is, as of October 1st, is 12 million, and the amount collected by those opposing is 1 million. There is no apparent fiscal impact. Prop 17 and Prop 18 will be presented by Molly Godfrey.
Hello. So I'm going to start with Prop 17. Prop 17 was put on the ballot by the legislature. It's a constitutional amendment that would allow people on parole for felony convictions to vote in California. Currently, the California Constitution disqualifies people with felonies from voting until their imprisonment and their parole is completed. This ballot measure would amend the state constitution to allow people with felonies who are on parole to vote. The ballot measure would keep imprisonment as a disqualification from voting, but remove the parole status, affecting an estimated 40 to 50,000 people that are currently on state parole in California. I want to mention that individuals in California with a criminal history must meet certain eligibility criteria in order to vote. All of those requirements can be found on the California Secretary of State website, but to clarify in general, individuals who are eligible to register to vote include those who are in county jail or are supervised by county probation in the community. However, those that are in state or federal prison or on parole for the conviction of a felony cannot. So Proposition 17 is specifically targeting those individuals with felonies. And how does California compare to other states on the issue? Well, currently California is only one of 3 states that require individuals convicted of felonies to complete their prison and their parole sentences before regaining the right to vote. Next slide, please. So if Prop 17 passes, the state's voting system would be updated to allow parolees to register to vote. It would also allow certain people on parole to run for public office. Because the current state law allows registered voters to run for elective offices, this measure would result in people on state parole being able to do so as well, but only if they meet existing qualifications such as not having been convicted of perjury or bribery. Supporters say that people on parole pay taxes and they should be allowed to vote, that parole is a time for people to rebuild their lives, and voting helps them become part of their community. Opponents say that parole is a time for violent criminals to prove that they have changed, and that parole should be completed before voting is allowed. Next slide, please. So key supporters of this proposition include the ACLU, Senator Kamala Harris, California Secretary of State Alex Padilla, and Senators Scott Wiener and Holly Mitchell. Key opponents include Senator Jim Nielsen and the Election Integrity Project. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, a yes vote supports this constitutional amendment to allow people on parole for felony convictions to vote. A no vote opposes this constitutional amendment, and the state would continue status quo by continuing to prohibit people who are on parole for felony convictions from voting. As of October 1st, $582,000 has been collected in support of this ballot initiative, but there hasn't been any money collected for those that oppose it. And as far as fiscal impact, it's estimated that if the proposition passes, the updated voting system would cost the state and county governments hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's Prop 17. Okay, Prop 18, a little bit more straightforward. So Prop 18 was also put on the ballot by the legislature. It's a constitutional amendment that would permit 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections if they will turn 18 by the next general election and be otherwise eligible to vote in California. So currently in California, you have to be 18 on or before the date of the election in order to vote in that election. How does California compare to other states on the issue? Well, currently 18 other states include, along with Washington, D.C., allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the time of the general election to vote in primary elections. Next slide, please. So what happens if Prop 18 passes? It would allow 17-year-olds who are U.S. citizens to register and vote in the primary election if they will be 18 by the time of the general election. Supporters say that allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primaries would help increase voter participation, and that if a person will be 18 by the general election, they should be allowed to help choose who will be on the ballot. Opponents say that 17-year-olds aren't legally adults, they're not mature enough to make important decisions, and that high school teachers and counselors would be able to influence the way that they vote. The next slide, please. So what would the impact be? If the prop passes, it will increase the number of people who can vote, and it will allow 17-year-olds to vote in primary or special elections if they'll be 18 by the time of the general election. Key supporters include Assemblymember Kevin Mullen and California Secretary of State Alex Padilla. Key opponents include Senator Jim Nielsen and the Election Integrity Project of California. Next slide, please. Okay, to wrap it up, a yes vote supports this constitutional amendment to allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the next general election to vote in primary and special elections. A no vote opposes this constitutional amendment, thereby continuing to prohibit 17-year-olds from voting. As of October 1st, $342,000 has been collected in support of this ballot initiative, and no contributions have been collected to oppose the ballot initiative. As far as fiscal impact, increasing the number of people who can vote will cost at least $1 million. And that's Prop 18. Thank you.
Prop 19 will be presented by Gina Trexler Souza.
Hello. Proposition 19 asks voters to answer the following question. Should the California Constitution be changed to modify the rules for transferring property tax assessed values and use any resulting new tax revenues for fire suppression efforts, schools, and local governments? In 1975, Proposition 13 set the initial tax assessment values. Annual increases were capped at 2%. Property taxes are limited to 1% of the assessed value plus voter-approved local taxes. When a house gets a new owner, the property is reassessed at its then current market value. Because the market value grows faster than that 2% cap, many properties are taxed far below market price. Next slide. If Proposition 19 passes, property tax rules for those over 55, those who are disabled, or those who are affected by natural disasters such as fire will change. Supporters argue that Proposition 19 protects older homeowners and creates new opportunities for renters. They argue that people should not have to pay higher taxes on a home lost to disaster. Opponents of Proposition 19 say that it's a tax increase that was rejected by voters in 2018 on their ballots. They say that Proposition 19 could hurt families who cannot afford to pay taxes on an inherited home. Next slide. If Proposition 19 passes, property tax for homeowners would increase for some and decrease for others. Extra funds would go to fire services and local governments. Supporters include the California Association of Realtors and the Yes on 19 PAC. Opponents include the No on 19 PAC and the Orange County Register. Next slide. A yes vote on Proposition 19 means that this constitutional amendment passes. It means that the number of times that persons over 55 years old or with severe disabilities can transfer their tax assessments increases from 1 to 3. The amount collected as of October 1st by supporters is $36 million. A no vote means that the constitutional amendment fails. The amount collected by those opposed as of October 1st, 2020 is $45,000. The fiscal impact would be an increase of millions of dollars to state and local government. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Prop 20 will be presented by Cynthia Batts.
Hi. Prop 20, California Proposition 20, Criminal Sentencing, Parole and DNA Collection Initiative. The ballot initiative would amend several criminal sentencing and supervising laws that were passed between 2011 and 2016. The ballot initiative would make specific types of theft and fraud crimes, including firearm theft, vehicle theft, and unlawful use of credit card chargeable as misdemeanors or felonies rather than just misdemeanors. The ballot initiative would also establish 2 additional types of crimes in state code, serial crime and organized retail crime, and charge them as wobblers, or also known as crimes chargeable as misdemeanors or felonies. The ballot initiative would require persons convicted of certain misdemeanors that were classified as wobblers or felonies before 2014, such shoplifters, grand theft, and drug possession, along with several other crimes, including domestic violence, prostitution with a minor, to submit, prostitution with a minor, to submit to the collection of DNA samples of state and federal databases. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, or DCR, has a parole review program in which felons convicted of nonviolent crimes, as defined in law, could be released on parole upon completing their sentences for his or her offense with the longest imprisonment term. The ballot initiative would also require the Parole Review Board to consider additional factors, such as felon's age, marketable skills, attitude about the crime, and mental condition, as well as the circumstances of the crimes committed before deciding whether to release a felon on parole. The ballot initiative would also allow prosecutors to request a review of the board's final decision. The ballot initiative would also define 51 crimes and sentences enhancement as violent in order to exclude them from the Parole Review Board program. Next slide, please. If 20 passes, if 20 passes, petty theft would be punished as a felony. The state would collect DNA samples from adults convicted of some misdemeanors such as drug possession, shoplifting, and domestic violence. Supporters, Prop 20 prevents violent criminals from getting out early. The argument also is collecting DNA for those convicted of drug possession or shoplifting will help solve more serious crime. The opposition states, California already has some of the toughest laws against serious crimes. And Prop 20 wastes millions of dollars on prisons that could be spent on education, healthcare, or affordable housing. Next slide, please. If Prop 20 passes, a new category of crime would be developed, wobblers. 51 crimes and sentence enhancements would be designated as violent in order to exclude them from the Parole Review Board program. Among the supporters are Assemblyman Jim Cooper, Vince Fong, the Los Angeles Protective League, Orange County Board of Supervisors. Opponents include former Governor Jerry Brown, the SEIU, Patty Quinlan, Lynn Schusterman, and the ACLU. Next slide, please. A yes vote means that crimes will be added to the list of violent felonies and DNA would be collected for misdemeanors. Amount collected as of October 1st was 4 million. A no vote means no charges to current law. Amount collected as of October 1st was 6 million. The fiscal impact increases costs for law enforcement and correctional system in the tens of millions of dollars. Thank you.
Prop 21 will be presented by Rachel Forrester.
Hello. Prop 21, a local rent control initiative. Rents in California are some of the highest in the nation, with renters paying 50% or more than that of those in other states. While approximately 1/5 of California's renters are subject to some form of local rent control, a 1995 statewide law places strict limitations on rent control. This law, known as the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, currently prohibits rent control on single-family homes, condos, townhouses, and all other properties built after 1995. It also prohibits what is known as vacancy control, wherein property owners may raise the rent to market rate following a vacancy. In 2018, California voters failed to pass Proposition 10, a similar initiative aimed at repealing Costa-Hawkins. Proponents of Prop 10 worked to remove the portions of Prop 10 that voters most objected to, and that is what you're voting on now. Next slide. If Prop 21 passes, Costa-Hawkins would be repealed, opening the door for local rent control statutes on housing that is more than 15 years old. It does not mandate or create new rent control laws. Rent control statutes must allow property owners a fair rate of return. Supporters say rent control helps folks stay in their homes, that it'll stop more gentrification and homelessness. Opponents say California already made up their mind on this in 2018, and rent control decreases the incentive for developers to build housing, affordable or not, at a time when we already face huge housing shortage. A side note on the claim that it will decrease the incentive for housing construction. When Costa-Hawkins was originally passed, the supporters claimed it was going to spur residential development. After Costa-Hawkins passed, California instead experienced a decrease in housing production. Next slide. If Prop 21 passes, the natural owners, not corporations, of one or two housing units will not be affected. It allows for vacancy control, wherein the owner of a property may only raise the rents on newly vacated unit by 15% during the 3 years following the vacancy. Its opponents include Governor Gavin Newsom, building trade unions, the California Apartment Association, the NAACP State Conference, and Essex Property Trust and Prometheus Real Estate Groups, among others. The supporters include progressive lawmakers, such as Bernie Sanders and Maxine Waters, service workers unions, the ACLU, and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and the California Democratic Party, among others. Next slide. To finish up, a yes vote means that local governments could enact rent control on housing that was first occupied 15 years ago. The amount collected as of the 1st of October was $24 million. A no vote means that rent control is prohibited on all housing that was first occupied after 1995. And the amount collected so far is $41 million. The fiscal impact to state and local governments could see a decrease in tax revenue in the high tens of millions, and that would be due to a decrease in property values. Thank you very much.
Prop 22 will be presented by Barbara Rugeley.
Prop 22 is in response to Assembly Bill 5, which was passed in 2019. It could which could interpret to classify ride-sharing workers as employees. Under AB 5, they would likely be covered by various state employment laws, including minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, and workers' compensation. Next slide, please. If Prop 22 passes, rideshare and delivery drivers would remain as independent contractors, not employees. The companies would have to pay 20% over the minimum wage for the hours worked. The companies would also have to pay health care benefits for drivers who work over 15 hours per week. Next slide, please. The supporters say, well, workers want to work as independent contractors. It gives them freedom to work within the hours that they want to fit into their schedules, like other jobs or childcare. The Uber CEO says, Uber would only have full-time jobs for a small fraction of our current drivers and only be able to operate in many fewer cities than today. Rides would be more expensive, which would significantly reduce the number of rides people could take, and in turn, the number of drivers needed to provide those rides. Now, the opponents say these rideshare companies just do not want to pay their drivers their basic benefits, such as Social Security, sick leave, and unemployment benefits. One organization leader said, these companies have lost in the legislative process, they've lost in the court. Now this is a last-ditch but very well-funded effort to permanently take control of all terms and conditions of employment of their workers. If it is successful, corporations in any industry would know that with enough cash and enough spend, you can buy your way to deregulation. The legislative author of AB 5 says these billion-dollar corporations still refuse to offer their workers what every other employee in California is entitled to: earning the minimum wage for all hours worked, Social Security, normal reimbursement for their costs, overtime pay, and the right to organize. Next, please. If Proposition 22 passes, any future changes to this law would have to be made by over 85% of the legislature and could not change anything meaningful in the law, or it would have to go to the voters to make that change. Rideshare companies would have to pay for insurance based upon the hours driven in the previous week. Supporters include, I think we're a slide beyond. Can we go back one? Supporters include unions such as California Peace Officers and California Police Chiefs, corporations such as Lyft and Uber. Organizations include California Chamber of Commerce, California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce, and the National Black Chamber of Commerce. The opponents include unions such as Service Employees International, California Teachers Association, and California Labor Association, officials such as Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and Joe Biden, and organizations such as Gig Workers Rising. Next slide, please. A yes vote means you support this ballot initiative to define rideshare drivers as independent contractors and adopt labor and wage policies specific to them. A no vote means you oppose this initiative, allowing California AB 5 to decide whether such drivers are employee or independent contractors. The yes has collected $184 million. The no has collected $11 million as of October 1. Thank you.
Prop 23 will be presented by Ann Belleman.
Proposition 23 will affect the operation of dialysis clinics. And if this sounds familiar to some of you, it's because there was a proposition also affecting dialysis clinics in 2018. I'll make mention of that later. It failed. In California, approximately 80,000, maybe a little bit more residents have to get dialysis every year. The treatment will require or does require that they visit a clinic 2 to 4 times a week. And the average stay per visit is 4 hours for dialysis. At the present time, California has about 600 licensed clinics, and they are owned by one of 2 major companies, DaVita and Fresenius Medical. The current operating standards of these clinics, as established by California law, have very limited requirements about staff-patient ratios. Most treatments in these clinics are paid for by Medicaid and Medicare, and that's at a fixed rate that the government negotiated. Private insurers have also negotiated a fixed rate, but it averages many times higher than that of government agencies, of Medicare and Medi-Cal. Next slide, please. If Proposition 23 passes, clinics would have to have a licensed physician on site during all treatment hours. There could be an exemption made if a physician is not available. In certain rural areas, that's a real possibility. A physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner could stand in for a physician. Clinics would have to report more information about patient infection occurrences. They would have to get consent from the state health department if they wanted to reduce services or to close. And clinics would be required to give the same level of care to government patients as they do for the privately insured patients. Supporters say that this initiative will give much greater protections to consumers who are receiving treatment. The opponents say that the requirement to have a licensed physician present is unnecessary for patient safety, and that the new regulations would be very costly and would drive the smaller clinics out of business. Next slide, please. SEIU, United Health Workers West, is a supporter of Proposition 23. They sponsored a different proposition in 2018 that I mentioned earlier that also added government regulations on clinics. It failed. Proposition 23 is another attempt with slightly different regulations. To date, approximately $6 million has been raised for this campaign in support of Proposition 23. The principal opponents of Proposition 23 are, no surprise, DaVita and Fresenius Medical. These are the companies that own most of the clinics in the state. To date, approximately $93 million has been raised for this campaign in opposition. These two sides, the owners of the clinics and SEIU, have been in conflict, in a labor management conflict that has been ongoing since 2017, because SEIU has been seeking to unionize clinic employees here in California and actually throughout the country. Next slide, please. A yes vote means that a physician must be present during clinic treatment hours, and that clinics must accept, without discrimination, all forms of medical insurance. And they must report more patient infection rates. A no vote means that there will be no change in the existing law. The fiscal impact. If Proposition 23 passes, there will be a fiscal impact in higher costs for government medical care, for government health costs, I should say, and for enforcement of the state health department regulations. Together, those costs are estimated to be in the tens of millions of dollars. Thank you.
Prop 24 will be presented by Kathy Bresnan.
Proposition 24 amends consumer privacy laws as an initiative statute. In 2018, Alistair McTaggart withdrew a consumer ballot proposition after negotiating with the California State Legislature, which passed a revised version of the initiative called the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. Alistair McTaggart filed Proposition 24 to expand the California Consumer Privacy Act's provisions. Next slide, please. If Proposition 24 passes, a state legislature will be created to enforce rules. Consumers can contact companies and prevent sharing data such as health, location, and private communications. Consumers will have increased power over personal data. Supporters argue we need to stop companies from tracking everything we do online. Proposition 24 will protect kids by giving states more power to go after companies that break privacy laws. Opponents argue Proposition 24 still gives companies too much power over our data. Consumers should not have to fill out paperwork and send forms to tech companies to have their data protected. Next item. If Proposition 24 passes, consumers will be given opt-out options for protecting personal data. Companies will be required to correct incorrect information upon request. Supporters include Andrew Yang, Common Sense, Consumer Watch Group. Opponents, the ACLU, the Consumer Federation of California, the California Alliance of Retired Americans. Next. A yes vote means that a private protection agency to enforce the state's consumer data privacy laws will be developed. It includes a yes vote supports the ballot initiative to expand the state's consumer data privacy law. It will prevent businesses from using and sharing sensitive data about health, finances, race, ethnicity, and precise location. It includes provisions that allow consumers to direct business to not share their personal information. It also removes the time limit in which businesses can fix violations before being penalized. A no vote means that the Privacy Protection Agency to enforce the state's consumer data privacy laws would not be developed. It opposes, a no vote opposes the burden placed on consumers to opt out of countless data practices one by one that companies are currently barred from by default. A no vote argues that people without money to spend cannot afford to spend for loyalty programs. A no vote opposes worse connections, looser, slower downloads, and more pop-up ads that will result from Proposition 24. The amount collected for a yes vote amounted to, as of 10/1/2020, $5 million. The amount collected for a no vote was $48,000. The impact would be, it increases the state costs of at least $10 million annually for a new state agency to oversee and enforce consumer privacy laws. It increases state costs to increase court and Department of Justice enforcement loads. Some of this would be paid by penalties collected for violation of the initiative. And that's the end of Proposition 24. Next slide, please.
Proposition 25 will be presented by Jerry Classic.
Proposition 25 is the last one for this afternoon, so take a deep breath. Here we go. It replaces the cash bail court system with a risk assessment system. Next slide. If Proposition 25 passes, there will be no more cash bail. It will be replaced by Senate Bill 10, which was passed and signed into law over 2 years ago. You can go ahead and read the arguments for and against while I explain a little bit about cash bail. Cash bail is our current guarantee of a suspect's presence at trial. The bail amount is based on the seriousness of the crime. If suspects cannot afford bail set by the court, they can use a commercial bail bond agent. The agent pays the full bail in exchange for a non-refundable fee, usually around 10%. Next slide, please. So, if Prop 25 passes and Senate Bill 10 then becomes law, it would get rid of money in the system completely in favor of risk assessments, which usually use computer algorithms to determine whether a suspect should be granted pretrial release and under what conditions. A low-risk suspect is deemed not dangerous and would be released from jail, and this would include most misdemeanor charges. A high-risk suspect would remain in jail with a chance to argue for their release before a judge. Medium risk suspects could be released or detained depending upon a local court's rules. The supporters include the California Teachers Association, Service Employees International Union, and those two representatives represent legislators that voted for SB 10. They say that Prop 25 balances safety, fairness, and the rights of defendants and victims. Prop 25 means that detention would not be based on the ability to pay, but on public safety risk. And Prop 25 would reduce the roughly 46,000 people awaiting trial in local jails, costing the state of California $5 million a day. Many of these people are not a safety risk. Opponents include the California Bail Agents Association, some law enforcement organizations, and business groups represented here by California Small Business Association. These groups say, without bail, many defendants don't show up for court and remain on the streets, putting our community's safety at risk. And the additional court hearings to overturn a computer's decision will increase delays in our already backlogged courts. There is another argument against Prop 25 represented here by the NAACP. Some civil and human rights organizations want to replace the cash bail system, but not with SB 10 because of the use of algorithms, which they believe are more biased against people of color. They want a better law to replace cash bail than SB 10. Next slide. So a yes vote means that cash bail would be replaced with risk assessments. And a no vote, and the supporters have collected $8 million so far. A no vote means that the cash bail system would remain, and the opponents have raised $9 million so far. As far as cost goes, setting up risk assessment teams in every court and having court hearings about high-risk assessments would be in the mid hundreds of millions of dollars annually. There would be savings because of fewer suspects in jail, which are estimated to be in the possible tens of millions of dollars annually. And now it's time for your questions.
Before we go to questions, I just want to stop on this last slide so people can see different places where you can get more information about the ballot measures. And I want to point out specifically at the bottom, Ballotpedia, because Ballotpedia has given us a lot of information, and they keep their information up to date about how much money has been collected. It's the only site I could find that did that. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we are going to start taking questions. And I'm going to start with the first question, goes to Prop 25. And it is, why does the NAACP oppose Prop 25?
I'm sorry if I didn't explain that well enough, but they feel like some of the algorithms are probably based on where the neighborhood you live in, the crime stats in that neighborhood, that kind of thing. The other thing is that technology companies that create these logarithms do not share exactly how they've come up with the logarithm, so that if somebody wanted to argue a special circumstance, it would be very hard for that suspect to argue against something they don't know how it was created.
There's a question here wanting to know what the league positions are, and those positions are easily found on the League of Women Voters of California. We don't usually share that at our pros and cons because we try to remain neutral. We did put our name on Prop 15 because we were very active in the creation of it. Rachel.
Our first question we had was on Prop 14, and it is Prop 14, who is monitoring the implementation of the funds at universities, etc.? So Katie, if you would like to unmute yourself and answer that.
The prop itself provides for a new committee within the CIRM that will do more monitoring, and also the board of directors will be increased from a wider variety of organizations. So those are the two things within Prop 14 that are intended to increase transparency and accuracy.
The NAACP State Conference opposes Prop 15. However, local NAACP branches take a stand to demonstrate autonomy. And just to make it clear, the NAACP of Pomona Valley, and Oakland strongly support Prop 15 based on our local community needs.
All right, next up, Prop 16 appears to be very fair to underserved, diverse groups in the society, but it seems to have strong opposition from Asian American groups in the state. Can you, where they feel this issue is divisive and non-inclusive, can you say, there's a little bit, can you say where and how they feel this is a divisive issue and not inclusive? So Barbara?
It's because there has been history of Asian communities having higher numbers of students admitted to the universities. And so they feel that, they feel like this is an either-or situation where either they maintain their numbers or those numbers go to somebody else. The opponents of that same argument, who are the supporters of the measure, say that that's not really a fair way to think of it, because first of all, sex and race and other issues are only one part of a larger group of issues that are taken into account when students are admitted. I'll take this next one. The advocates say that 80% of drivers want to stay independent, so vote no on Prop 22. Is that a true statement?
I don't have any independent data to say one way or the other. I have seen the same ads everybody else has, that the drivers seem to want that. I haven't seen a survey otherwise.
Thank you for that. Next, we have another comment here on the NAACP, and I'm glad this topic is being brought up. She wanted to say, can we highlight the fact that they are referring to the NAACP state conference and not the national NAACP? Some of today's props are just mentioned the NAACP, and it's not the entire national organization. In California, there are 52 local branches, and national nation, there are 2,500 branches nationwide. She just wanted to make this distinction. So I'll thank you to the attendant that brought this up. In my research for Prop 21, the rent control measure, I did find that there was some controversy in the during the 2018 ballot measure for Proposition 10, which was the rent control measure then, that one of the members of the board for the NAACP state conference had taken consulting funds by one of the proponents of that proposition, one of the opponents of it. So that one thing together brought in some question about that endorsement. I cannot speak to any of the other propositions that were endorsed by the NAACP state conference, but it is just a singular group. So I really appreciate that that was, some clarity was brought to that in particular. That with all of these endorsements, that it should be really clear to look at them for what they are and kind of dig a little deeper into what these endorsements mean.
I don't see any more new questions. Do you, Rachel?
I do not. There was, is it there? Let me see if it's still there. I believe somebody might have put their hand up, but I think it's lowered now.
Does Barbara want to speak?
I've looked on Ballotpedia, and they say by a 4-to-1 margin, independent surveys show these app-based drivers overwhelmingly prefer to work as independent contractors. 4-to-1 margin, that's 80%. So they work their jobs around other jobs in childcare. That's what I found.
Thank you, Barbara. If there are no other questions, and I don't see any more.
We have one more new question, Barbara,
Go ahead.
and it is for you. It says, does Prop 16 apply to college admission policies?
Yes, it does. But perhaps I should add, it only applies to public colleges. It does not apply to private colleges. All of Prop 16 applies to public agencies, not private agencies or private schools.
We have another question that's come up. This one is for Gina, and it is, who will taxes go up for under Prop 19?
You could just give me one moment. I have that here, but I have to look it up. The issue for people whose taxes may go up, it will be for property transfers. Let's say you are transferring your property to your child or your grandchild. The first $1 million of that exemption, or, the first $1 million of that tax rate would be exempt from the reassessment, but beyond $1 million, your taxes would go up if you were to transfer your property.
Thank you, Gina.
Oh, I just want to add that that would not begin until 2023.
2023. So Gina, I have a follow-up question to that. If it doesn't start until 2023, does that mean that people who pass their property on to their children or grandchildren now, they fall under the current Prop 13 rules?
Yes.
Follow up to that question, Gina, is that transfer your property or a sale of your property?
That is a property transfer.
And then to answer about where you will be able to find the recording of this event tomorrow, it will be posted both to our website and to our YouTube channel. And then we also will link into that on our Facebook page.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks to all of our presenters. And I'm going to say good day now.